instance, and in 2022 appointed a female coach as the European Week of Sport ambassador as a role model. To provide more evidence and address the media coverage on women in sport, the Commission runs a joint project, All in Plus, with the Council of Europe. Finally, the Commission encourages equality, a safe environment and inclusive sport through the funding priorities of the Erasmus Plus sport actions. Unfortunately, when it comes to gender-based violence, there is no place which is completely safe for women and girls, including in sport. Despite some progress, sexual harassment remains ubiquitous in our societies. Combating all forms of violence against women and domestic violence is a key priority for this Commission. This is why we welcome the European Union's accession to the Council of Europe Istanbul Convention on preventing and combating violence against women and domestic violence in June 2023, last June. The European Union Gender Equality Strategy for 2025 recognizes the urgency of addressing sexual harassment as a form of gender-based discrimination and violence. In the European Union, women also often face sexual harassment at work. This has significant negative consequences for the victims, the employers, and workplace culture. Sexual harassment is covered by the International Labour Organization Convention 120 on violence and harassment in the world of work. The European Strategy Framework on Health and Safety at Work acknowledges the negative consequences of workplace violence, harassment and discrimination, whether based on sex or any other grounds. The Commission supports, together with the European Agency for Safety and Health at Work, awareness raising on workplace harassment and gender bias, and calls on the Member States to promote gender considerations in design, implementation and reporting. Regarding legislative measures, I would like to recall that harassment based on sex and sexual harassment in the field of employment and occupation and access to goods and services are already prohibited under EU law on gender equality in the area of employment and occupation. In March 2022, the Commission proposed EU-wide rules to end gender-based violence against women and domestic violence. You are currently negotiating this proposal with the Council. I would like to use this occasion to thank the European Parliament for its constructive approach to successfully conclude the negotiations still under this mandate, which I believe is our shared goal. The Commission is furthermore proposing that managers in the public and private sector are obliged to receive training on how to recognise sexual harassment at work, provide support to victims and respond in an adequate manner. This is not limited to physical sexual harassment, but covers all forms of unwanted verbal, non-verbal or physical conduct of a sexual nature. Once the directive is adopted in the Member States where sexual and psychological harassment constitute a crime offence, victims of those forms of violence will benefit from the established measures on protection, support, including targeted support for victims of sexual harassment at work, and access to justice. The Commission remains fully committed to upholding women's rights and combating any form of violence against women, including sexual harassment. Thank you very, very much for your attention. Thank you.
Thank you, Madam Commissioner. We start now with group spokesmen, and the first one from the EPP is Ms. Estaras Faragut.
Señor Presidente,
President, just a few weeks ago, during the celebrations following the Spanish victory for the World Women's Football Championship, I think all of us saw firsthand the disgusting, reprehensible attitude showed by the President of the Spanish Football Federation, who violated the dignity and rights of all women. his behaviour reflects without any doubt the tip of the iceberg when it comes to widespread sexual violation which has existed for a long time. This means that we have to roundly condemn any form of violence against women. We have to eradicate this with immediate and efficient responses. This is why it's important that we send out an appeal to the whole sporting community to ensure that they comply with the Istanbul Convention, protect, prevent, persecute and eliminate, protect women, prevent and persecute and eliminate all forms of violence against them. The response from the whole of society was overwhelming. The enormous support extended to Jenni Hermoso, the world champion, was generous and impressive. So our thanks must go out to Jenni and all those who showed solidarity with her. They've given us a clear lesson. Never again should a woman be forced to accept such degrading behaviour. We have to fight for equality to ensure that we have a world of sport free from discrimination and violence. So we have to bring an end to. We all support you, Jenni. You've written history on the sporting field, but also when it comes to the fight against equality for women in the world of sport. I'm winding up. Our society wants to ensure that our leaders show responsibility. Hopefully there'll be unanimous support for our calls for defending women in the same way as we saw unanimity when it comes to the support for the law in Spain, only if we say yes, say yes.
Ms Regner, on behalf of the S&D Group.
Thank you very much, President, Commissioner. When is it's unacceptable behaviour? That's a question that everyone, when there is no consent for a kiss. Consent is key, and that's true for all interactions. People should have the right to say yes or no. And there has to be a possibility to express one's will. Only yes means yes, and that needs to be clear, whether that is at home behind closed door or if it is in front of the cameras when everyone's watching, whether it's in the workplace or whether it is in the workplace. The kiss was unwanted, but there was no opportunity to reject that, and that is abuse. And I think the discussion has made things clear to people. What is consent? The right of a woman to determine what happens to her body is no longer something which it's a necessity.
Thank you. On behalf of New Europe, Ms Faring.
Monsieur le Président, Madame la Commissaire.
President, Commissioner, dear colleagues, a kiss on the mouth without consent is not a mutual or consensual act. No, Mr. Rubiales, it's an unacceptable act of aggression. Fortunately, this act by the former president of the Spanish Football Federation on Jenni Hermoso was filmed, which made it possible for public support to be given to the player. Without that, he would never have resigned because he was protected. But how many aggressions are hit and how many athletes are victims of abusive coaches, doctors, managers, how much pain is hidden by sports federations. But sexual aggression is unacceptable everywhere. But there is still an omerta in sport right up to the top of the federation, and it destroys men and women. Legislation exists, but it is not respected. It is up to us as parliamentarians to apply it, to put pressure on sporting organisations like Fifa to amplify the voice of victims, to encourage women's sport, to promote education about consent from a very early age, and to harmonise our legal instruments, because never again should a man taint a victory by women.
Thank you very much. Our next speaker on behalf of the Greens is Ms Rubiales. Thank you, President. Commissioner, this has been a good parliament as far as the battle for gender equality is concerned, but let's be clear, there's still an enormous amount of work to do. The non-consensual kiss between Rubiales and Jenni Hermoso shows how difficult it is to put an end to violence and the impunity, both of which are structural in sport. We can put together laws promoting equality in the world of sport as well, and that's what we should do. The number of players or female referees is still vastly lower than men, and the wage gap is unacceptable. The best player in the world, Alexia Putellas, makes in a year what a counterpart in a men's team would make in a month. It's also important that we have more women in the sport decision-making areas. The Spanish Football Federation meeting had only 6 women out of 140 members, and that's absolutely scandalous. Something which kept applauding the macho reactionary speech of Mr. Rubiales. So we need to make sure that high representations, such as the Spanish Football Federation, should respect gender equality in its decision-making bodies. And, Mr. Borrell, it's not that we're learning to play like men, we are learning to break the silence. As Deborah, the football player, said, we've been quiet for too long. We had to listen to an awful lot and put up with an awful lot, and now we are going to speak when we feel like it and where we feel like it. Thanks very much. Thank you, says the President. On behalf of the ECR Group, Mr. Buxade Villaba.
Presidente, Comisario.
Thank you, President, Commissioner. Let's make it clear, any form of violence against women in sport is carried out by men, is permitted by the fact that in many cases men are responsible for giving them the cups and so on. Some years ago, the Spanish Socialist Party changed the penal code. More than 1,000 condemnations, 100 people were released from prison for sexual aggressors. That's the law you adopted. You put forward that law, you voted on it, you adopted it, you applauded it. And today, women enjoy less freedom. Thousands of women and young girls are attacked physically by sexual predators in Spain everywhere. 46% of people condemned for sexual violence in 2021 were foreign. Strangely enough, when the perpetrators are Spanish, we hear silence from you because it doesn't fit in your moral framework. So we've now seen this spectacle of an obscene act, a lack of respect for women, but you promote sexualization of young women and children in schools. And we've seen examples where we have people attacking young girls in parks. You do nothing about this once again because it doesn't fit in with your moral framework, which suggests that the people we have to destroy is white Western man. It's true to say that women face a danger. The fact is, this time around, we've got proof of it.
For the left group, Ms. Villanueva Ruiz.
Gracias, presidente.
Thank you, President. It's over. That's what the Spanish women's players showed when they raised a banner at the World Cup. The women were showing their pride and have made large numbers of women and girls extremely proud and wanting to follow the same path. The culture of rape and sexual discrimination, labour discrimination, silence, impunity, though all of those things are now under attack. A whole wave of people, women and men in Spanish society have said you can't have sexual freedom without consent. We are now fully aware of that, but it's still, there are a lot of areas of resistance. Rubiales tried to pretend that it was consensual, and that's why we, in all the institutions, need to work together to make this a reality. Thanks to the feminist movement and legislative changes, which are part of the fight, where Spain is now a pioneer, we're still making progress, and that's the only way it will finally come to an end.
Thank you very much. The next speaker will be Mr. Geruso.
Presidente, colleghi,
Madam President, colleagues, just imagine at the end of the Qatar World Cup, an Argentinian delegate tried to kiss Lionel Messi on the lips. What would have happened? The fact, here in this case, a Spanish leader did this with a female player. The problem at its root is cultural. It's we need to educate young children about mutual respect, but full understanding of sexuality and the sexuality of others. However, we also have to address it at a legal level. In Italy, women only have a very short period when it comes to reporting rape or sexual crime. Just recently, it was just 6 months. The fact is that in some cases, in other countries, women are able to report rapes after many years. The women have the courage to face the trauma. There's an obligation in all member states in the European Union to promote sexual education of young people and to ensure that there's a time limit of at least 5 limits to allow women to report rapes and sexual harassment. Otherwise, we'll face further decades in which rape and other forms of sexual violence will remain unpunished.
Thank you very much. Mrs. Fitzgerald.
No woman is safe from sexual harassment, not even a winner of the World Cup. What we witnessed this summer is a reflection of the widespread disrespect and misogyny faced by female athletes. I ask, if this can happen in public for the whole world to see, just imagine what happens in private and behind closed doors. The arrogance, the audacity, the collusion in full view of the world to see. An insult to women and to the men who champion equality in sport. What is now emerging is what many of our top female and indeed male athletes have had to cope with in terms of blatant harassment and again the women, misogyny they've faced and demeaning behaviour. And of course, it is time to call halt to this. What we have seen in recent years is a wonderful flourishing of female sport, making up for decades of invisibility and societal appreciation. But thanks to terrific initiatives by many in sporting organisations and indeed the resilience of sportswomen themselves. However, we still have a wage gap of 13% overall and media coverage, this is hard to believe, of barely 4%. We still have huge work to do for women in most sporting bodies at all levels, administration, coaching and amongst players. Future generations of young girls deserve equal access to a safe environment to participate in sport. This is the very minimum that they deserve. Thank you.
Vielen Dank. Nächste Rednerin ist die. Thank you very much. The next speaker is our colleague Mrs. Fritzon.
Tack, fru talman, kommissionär.
President, Commissioner, football is the largest sport in the world and also the greatest expression of culture. Wherever you go in the world, you can find children who are wearing football shirts and they're dreaming of becoming championship players. And what we saw was a professional athlete who in her finest hour was subject to an attack. And this is what a lot of women athletes have been telling us. And it's important that we support Jenni and all women football players, and we make sure that we do everything we can to achieve a change so that the young girls who are now starting to dream of and discover the pleasure of football, that they can have positive experiences. That's what our girls deserve. And now I think the colleague Vasquez Lasera is not here. In that case, let me give the floor to Mr. Otasun.
The shameful act of sexual violence and aggression by Mr. Rubiales should be condemned by this House. But also, we also saw how the feminist movement rose up in Spain and throughout Europe, a movement that's more and more necessary to say that they're no longer going to tolerate such actions which ended up making Mr. Rubiales resign. We've seen all of the prejudice that still exists in sport. There's now an attempt to achieve wage equality, which is a shameful thing that does not exist in Europe, but there are still issues such as maternity leave, protocols against harassment. There's a lot to do to protect female athletes against discrimination, as well as the masculinization of the high instances of power when you saw all these men shamefully applauding Mr. Rubiales in the Spanish Football Federation meeting. But Jenni and the other footballers have shown us an example in the whole of Europe, thanks to all of them.
Kanko.
Thank you very much. The next speaker will be Mrs. Kanko.
No means no, President von der Leyen said in her speech yesterday. Sadly, this basic principle is still something we need to fight for. I stand here today as a mother, as a woman, as a lawmaker working on the Directive on Combating Violence Against Women. I hope that together we bring closer the day that in our workplaces, streets and homes, nobody needs to be convinced that no means just no. And the absence of yes also means no. We all know that the first kissing is just the tip of the iceberg of what women endure every day in many places inside and outside the sports world, whether they are on top or at the bottom of the ladder. But laws alone are not going to solve this problem. We must all think about our daily habits, men and women. Yes, men. Women can be your boss and continue being who they are. Face it. No, women. It is not okay to play groupies and pick-me games. Be allies. Who do you pick as allies? When do you look away? Only if we realize, as lawmakers, that this is bigger than a law, will we be able to truly start changing something and making our kids proud. Thank you.
Dankeschön. Nächste Rednerin.
Thank you very much. The next speaker is Ms. Rego.
Gracias, Presidenta.
Thank you, Madam President. The image of a sexual aggression was broadcast throughout Europe. The president of the Spanish Federation of Football kissed without consent one of the world champions. Such an act is clearly an example of sexual abuse and abuse of power, and he questioned that. He was talking about something which is now normalised in all spheres of life. I'd like to make it clear that his privileges and abuses are something which are quite normal. However, this doesn't mean that for women they should accept the fact that somebody touches their arse in the street or that your boyfriend forces you to kiss you or make love. However, this is acceptable for many people, apparently. What we're talking about is sexual abuse. This is a privilege of men who abuse and disregard our rights of our own bodies, as we saw this recently. However, the uprising of Spanish sportswomen shows this now over. We can insist now on our rights to ensure that we have the right to play sport, or at the same time also working and conducting politics in environments which are free of sexual aggression.
Kollegin Galvez.
Thank you very much. The next speaker will be Mr. Frankowski. Sorry, Lena. Mr. Frankowski is first. Sorry.
Gender balance.
Szanowna Pani Komisarz.
Madam Commissioner, the events in Spain moved the world of sport. I used to be a professional footballer, and I know the world of sport very well. And it's pitiful that this happened in a field where you should normally have the values of equality, and Mr. Rubiales showed something totally different than the ideals of sport. But that's not the only situation there, and one should see that violence in sports remains to be a problem. Violence in the football pitch and outside the pitch, that influences negatively the image of footballers, of players in general. It can hurt the image of sport as a way of portraying positive things. Unfortunately, there is violence in clubs at the amateur level, and particularly with respect to team sports. We have seen in research that racism and discrimination are a common problem in amateur sport and in professional sport. Therefore, we should do the utmost to draw conclusions from what happened and make sure that this happens never again. My report from 2021 on the future of European sport policy includes a number of recommendations that should be put into force as quickly as possible at the level of sport federations, and sport must be free from any violence. Thank you.
Thank you very much. And now it's Ms. Galvez Munoz.
Comisaria, el caso...
President, Commissioner, the Rubiales case isn't an isolated one. It's actually the normal way that machos operate. The opaque world of football, where there's so much money and so much power, since they're all men, they still haven't understood what happened. Women, however, do understand, and we've said it's over. This unwelcome and unwanted kiss, an unconsented to kiss, isn't something which is part of the male-centred culture of the West, Mr. Buxade, but it's also something that women know that this is something that happens every day. There's now an awareness raising going on, a feminist movement which is very tough, and some of the most advanced equality laws in the world, and a socialist government which is building an institutional architecture and didn't bow to the reactionaries of equality. This shameful incident has shown how deeply rooted feminism is in society and how we continue to fight against the people who try to stop this movement. And it's happening even though it's deeply rooted in the world of sport. It's over. Thank you.
Thank you very much. The next speaker will be Ms. Rodriguez Ramos.
Gracias, Presidenta.
Thank you, President. Members of the Spanish national football team had to win the World Cup for the world to listen to them. And even in the past, they've spoken out many times. For years, they'd faced a situation of discrimination, of demeaning treatment, both on and off the field. So the events during the World Cup celebrations wasn't just an isolated one-off. That was simply an example of what they've been living for a long time. And what's more, many of the people watching on TV live similar things in their lives. Political and sporting leaders in Spain should have acted earlier. If they had done so, Rubiales wouldn't have had to resign. He would have been fired, and all of this wouldn't have happened. And the fact is, future victories for the Spanish football team depend on its players. But it's up to us to ensure that we don't have a rerun of what's happened that night. This is a Spanish women football team shirt. Several commissioners have signed it. The President interrupts. The President interrupts.
Tolerancia cero a la discriminación y la violencia sexual.
So we have to call for zero tolerance of sexual violence in sport.
This is against the rules of the House, as you know, and I would have to ask you to refrain from showing, even if I like it, these kind of symbols. So, nächste Rednerin ist die Kollegin von Kramon.
The next speaker will be Ms. von Kramon-Taubadel. President, Commissioner, dear colleagues, no means no. That's something that Ursula von der Leyen said in her State of the Union speech. And so Rubiales kissed Jenni Hermoso in front of the camera. She had no opportunity to say no. Thousands of athletes said that they had experienced violence in sport, and they weren't old enough to say yes. And most of the time, the perpetrator wasn't punished, but the victim was threatened. Now, in this parallel world of international sport with corruption, sexism, we need reform. We need a safe international place with a clear mandate for the protection of women and punishment of those committing these acts. in politics as well. Far too many people are looking away rather than dealing with the sporting federation. We need to protect female athletes and do as much as we can to ensure the integrity of sport. And so I call on you to support female athletes in their call for an anti-corruption agency. The next speaker will be Mr. Ressler.
Svaka sportašica, svaka žena.
Every sportsman, every woman needs equality, deserves respect. Female sport, just as male sport, is a life of much work, much suffering, and renouncing to many things in order to be the best, in order to be what you really are. But in order to have women and men compete, and in order to be able to be just winners, we have to say this openly, they need to be women. Many throughout history wanted to have an easier way to success by cheating or hormones or doping. But now those who try to erase differences between men and women are putting new obstacles between men and women sports. They do cheating, and then they are there to cause problems over women. And this is something that is degrading sports. We have to protect the dignity of sport and the dignity of female sportsmen. And we have to have competitions without any ideological whims. Thank you.
Thank you very much. The next speaker will be Mr. Smerilio.
Kolega Smirinjo ima riječ.
Madam President, Madam Commissioner, what happened is a very serious matter. The act of macho violence is an abuse of power, the physical demonstration of how patriarchal culture is still present in sport. All you need to do is think about the recent abuse uncovered in women's football carried out by trainers. Unfortunately, this is a problem that's widespread. One sportswoman in 7 under the age of 18 says that they have been the victims of sexual violence and harassment, often from their coaches. But discrimination against female sportswomen has many forms. We need to make certain that more work is done in this area. Getting rid of Rubiales is a step forward and a very important one, but we can't just use a repressive tactic. We need to have territorial networks which make sure that women who are victims of abuse and harassment are protected. We can't just stop here. We need to educate men in terms of emotional education. Women aren't objects, they're not trophies to be shown as a sign of power. Consensus is the only, and consent are the only criteria that count in sport and elsewhere. Thank you.
Thank you. The next speaker will be Ms. Yenbu.
Merci.
Thank you. It's over. We need to stop with impunity. It took 3 weeks before Rubiales agreed to step down. 3 weeks of condemnation from everywhere, but 3 weeks were not enough to make him admit that his jest was unacceptable and was sexual harassment. And that is the problem that some people, far too many people, have not yet understood. But this is aggression, this is violence. Yes, even for a stolen kiss, it's not possible to justify these acts. And so I call on everyone. We no longer need to wait for those who are perpetrating this violence to resign. You need to take the decision. Don't look away. Be courageous and take the decisions which are necessary to protect the freedom and of women. The shame needs to switch camps. Thank you very much. We can't find the colleague, Ms. Miranda. In that case, the next speaker will be Ms. Bayarin Cereza.
Take your time. It's not your fault that the other speaker is not there. Please.
Y yo le dije,
I said, "Going to give you a kiss." And she said, "Okay." Those now notorious words have been written in the history of sport. They represent the very worst of sexual violence and discrimination against women. They mark a historical milestone in our fight against wage discrimination and the lack of technical support. However, what happened led to a wave of indignation and rejection in the country, a wave of female solidarity around the world, which the leaders of the Spanish Football Federation couldn't ignore. Despite that, however, Rubiales did not resign. As we keep here, it's all over now. This wasn't just a kiss. It was sexual abuse and abuse of power. That's a fact. However, this is relevant way beyond the world of football. The similar problems exist for women players of many sports, including young girls, as Simone Biles or Angelique Kochning have also said. Journalists, politicians, waitresses also face similar problems. We have to bring an end to this culture of impunity. And what happened this year will be a talking point. The fact is, today in this European Parliament, we're going to say once again, loud and clear, se acabó, it's over.
Thank you very much. The next speaker is Ms. Carlsborough.
Fru talman, kommissionen.
President, Commissioner, colleagues, all of those listening, sometimes we hear that what happens on the football pitch or in the stadia or in bedrooms is not politics, but of course it is a politics. It's a societal issue that women are discriminated against and attacked, and it behoves all of those in power to change things. Football could have said they could have she was then accused that somehow she was at fault. I think this is a traditional way that the blame is shifted. Football has made great progress. It's now a sport which is for men and women. But if girls are to be brave and tie up their football boots, we need to make sure that they will not be subject to aggression. Thank you very much. The next speaker is Ms. Herzberger-Fofana.
Merci, Madame la Présidente.
Thank you, Madam. Thank you, Madam President. Sexism, racism, homophobia. Just a few examples of the discrimination which female sports players face. The most symbolic example of this is how Afro-American athletes in the 1968 Olympic Games in Mexico raised fists. The Women's World Football Cup has exposed this whole question. The forced kiss given by Rubiales has brought to light of day sexual violence. This non-consensual kiss was an example of sexual violence. We condemn this. This is another example of how high-level women athletes are seen in the world of sport. Up until now, their performance wasn't considered to be as good as that of men. They were paid far less than their male counterparts. There's numerous examples of inequality in women's sport. Their training conditions are terrible. We also remember the debate about female players wearing a veil who were subject to all sorts of discrimination as well. This whole scandal of the non-consensual kiss eclipsed the victory of those female foot players. No is no. And the President of the Commission said this yesterday. We have to increase the presence of women in the governing bodies of sport so that the voice of women players can also be heard. Se acabó. It's finished. The women's silence, a lack of respect, No is no, and we have to bring an end to impunity. Thank you.
Come some catch the eye.
Thank you very much. That brings us to the Catch the Eye procedure. There are 3 requests which we can take. We'll start with Mr. Sean Kelly and then Mr. Garcia de Blanco.
Iban, you will be next in the Catch the Eye. Who will still? No? Okay. All right. Then please. Please, microphone for Sean Kelly, 144.
Thank you, Chair. It's not often that we have a debate in this Parliament around sport or matters of sport in general. Therefore, I greatly welcome this debate this morning as it relates to the Women's World Cup. And at the outset, I have to say that the Women's World Cup had a lot of positives. The play was very good. There was very good skills demonstrated. And of course, my own country, Ireland, were also participating while they also got on very well, but the manager, although the manager has since departed the team. But of course, some of these positives have been diminished because of the incidents that happened since then. So it shows that we have a long road to go from now, so that there is equality between men and women in sporting events. But I hope that debates such as this and the various committees in the Parliament will help to achieve this goal. Gurma, thank you.
Dann darf ich jetzt direkt das Wort Malin Björk.
Now let me give the floor to Malin Björk.
Thank you very much. I would like to thank Jennifer Hermoso and the whole Spanish team, also those who actually boycotted and didn't come to the World Cup. I want to thank them for the games. I followed all of them. And you beat my country, Sweden. But it was a very beautiful game. I want to thank you also because you are role models on the field and off the field. And this is one of the reasons why I love women's football. You play creatively, strong, powerful games, and then you walk off the pitch and you continue to be role models. And you cannot wish for better. And there has been enormous support for the Spanish team and to denounce the behavior of Rubiales and Vilda and the others machos in the Spanish Federation. And let them all fall out now. Let them all be gone in Spain and elsewhere where they are. And let us continue the fight for equality, for you on the field, so that we can enjoy women's football. We will enjoy it next year for the Olympic Games, and we will continue to enjoy it for the World Cup and for all the generations to come. You have shown the way. We will stand with you in solidarity. This is a Me Too for sports, but all of us know it's all of a society, and we are behind you and with you. You have our backs.
Vielen Dank. Dann darf ich jetzt für die...
Thank you very much. And now for the Commission, Commissioner Ferreira.
Dankeschön, President. And allow me for a personal note just to say that enhorabuena, campeones. Honourable members, thank you very much for this debate. It's really a debate on civilization. In fact, and now I speak on behalf of Vice President Chinas, as I mentioned, and I strongly condemn all forms of sexual harassment and violence in the workplace, the sports field, and everywhere else. We count on you to make smooth progress with your co-legislators on the adoption of a directive on violence against women and domestic violence. The adoption of a strong and comprehensive directive on violence against women and girls is the best signal we can give that we no longer tolerate violence. We want to combat and prevent sexual harassment and violence in a holistic way. Let us ensure sport is a place of victory for gender equality. Thank you very much for your attention and muchas gracias a las campeonas.
Well done to the world champions.
Vielen herzlichen Dank.
Thank you very much. That brings us to the next item on the agenda, which is the oral question to the question on improving firefighters' working conditions. The